The alien world carried a legend that chilled every heart. At the edge of the capital stood a giant structure made of black stone, older than any empire. Its walls shifted like they were alive, its halls swallowed light, and its traps never stopped resetting. They called it the Death Labyrinth. No one who entered ever came out. Some said the maze itself was hungry, that it fed on screams and blood. The alien nobles loved to send prisoners and slaves inside as a cruel sport. The crowd would gather outside, staring at the huge gates, waiting for the sound of pain to echo through the stone. Every time, it was the same. A victim went in. The gates slammed shut, and then silence, followed by one last scream before the labyrinth claimed another life. On this day, the stands were full. Alien lords and their servants leaned forward with cruel smiles. Soldiers stood in rows, spears glittering under the pale sun. The air buzzed with excitement, because today's sacrifice was different. Today, a human had been captured and dragged to the gates. He was shackled, bruised, and still bleeding from his earlier fights. The aliens jeered and mocked. "Look at him. Small body, weak skin. He will not last a minute." Laughter rolled like thunder across the crowd. Even the guards who pushed him forward smirked. To them, the labyrinth would chew this strange creature faster than any beast before. The human did not fight when they shoved him forward. He only raised his eyes to the massive walls, studying the black stone that seemed to breathe. He tilted his head as if listening to something no one else could hear. The guards spat near his feet. "Walk, fragile one. Go meet your end." With chains rattling, he stepped across the threshold. The air inside was colder, damp with the scent of rot and dust. Then, with a deep groan, the gates behind him slammed shut. The sound echoed like a final heartbeat. Outside, the nobles leaned closer to the viewing screens that showed the inside passages. The game had begun. The corridor ahead was narrow, lit by faint green moss glowing along the walls. Bones cracked under his boots. Some were old and white, others fresh with scraps of alien flesh still clinging. He crouched for a moment, touching a skull with careful fingers, and whispered under his breath, "You all rushed, didn't you?" He stood again, eyes sharp. The crowd outside expected him to panic, to scream, to run blindly into the shadows like everyone before. But the human did something no one expected. He smiled. The labyrinth gave its first warning. Somewhere ahead, a grinding noise echoed, followed by a sudden metallic click. The human froze, body stiff, head turning slightly. Instead of running, he slid his hand into his boot and pulled out a tiny shard of mirror he had hidden. He angled it carefully, using the reflection to peek around the next corner. Just as he did, darts shot out from hidden holes in the wall, stabbing the opposite side with deadly force. The aliens outside gasped. No one had ever avoided the first trap. Every prisoner in history had been pierced before they even understood what was happening. But this human, this fragile creature, had not moved forward. He had waited. He had watched. And he had survived. A murmur ran through the alien nobles. Some hissed that it was luck. Others narrowed their eyes. The human slowly lowered the mirror shard, slid it back into his boot, and pressed himself against a thin crack in the wall. The next wave of darts fired, missing him completely. When the wall fell silent again, he moved forward with calm steps, as if he had done this 100 times before. His face showed no fear. His breathing stayed steady. Outside, the nobles' laughter faded. The crowd's excitement turned into curiosity. As he walked deeper, the corridor widened into a hall with shifting stone tiles. Some of them trembled slightly, like they were waiting to collapse. The human crouched again, pulling a coin-sized piece of metal from his pocket. He tossed it lightly onto one of the tiles. The stone dropped instantly, revealing a bottomless pit with spikes glistening below. The crowd roared in surprise. The human only chuckled to himself. He tapped the wall gently, listening to the echoes. Each sound told him where the solid ground lay and where danger waited. Slowly, carefully, he stepped forward, avoiding death with nothing more than patience and sound. The nobles leaned back in unease. This was not normal. Every other species had failed in panic and pride. Warriors had run in with weapons raised, only to be swallowed alive. Champions had screamed their last breath within minutes. But this human was different. He did not fight the labyrinth with strength. He tested it. He studied it. He moved like someone solving a puzzle, not charging into battle. The walls around him shifted with a deep rumble, closing passages and opening new ones. The crowd outside cheered again, hoping the moving maze would crush him. The human stopped and tilted his head. His lips curved into a thin smile. "So you change, huh?" he whispered to the stone. He placed his hand flat against the wall, waiting, counting the seconds between each shift. His eyes narrowed as he traced the pattern. To him, the labyrinth was not a monster. It was a machine, and all machines followed rules. Minutes passed. The screens showed him slowly vanishing into the deeper tunnels. The crowd sat in silence now, no longer laughing. The human steps echoed like drumbeats, steady and confident, refusing to rush, refusing to break. The nobles whispered among themselves, unsettled. This was not supposed to happen. The labyrinth had never been challenged like this. But one human, armed with nothing but small tricks and stubborn calm, was changing everything. And though the maze was hungry for his life, the human walked deeper with eyes that said he was ready to play. Do you want me to expand part 2, the first trap, into 900 words in the same style next? The human walked deeper into the darkness, his boots brushing against dust and broken bones. The air grew thicker, heavy with the smell of rusted metal and dried blood. Every sound mattered now. A single breath too loud could trigger something. His eyes scanned the narrow corridor ahead, where the walls seemed too smooth, too clean. He had seen enough battlefields to know when silence was a lie. Something was waiting here. The first faint click came from his left, sharp and sudden, like teeth snapping shut. His muscles stiffened, but he didn't rush forward. Instead, he lowered himself carefully, one knee touching the ground, and slid a hand into his boot. The shard of broken mirror he had hidden caught a faint glimmer from the mossy light. Holding it low, he angled it carefully around the corner ahead. In the reflection, he saw it. A dozen small holes carved into the stone, almost invisible. They waited like hungry eyes. He had seen similar designs before in old human war ruins, places where soldiers set up traps to kill without lifting a sword. This maze used the same cruel logic. He didn't speak, didn't move, only studied the holes. His instincts told him the trap was pressure-based. Bones scattered across the floor proved it. Those before him had stepped without thinking, and the labyrinth punished them instantly. Outside the walls, nobles leaned closer to their glowing screens, waiting for the darts to fire, waiting for another body to fall. Some aliens whispered bets, placing coins and jewels on how many steps the human would last before screaming. None of them expected what happened next. The human stayed crouched, lifting the shard a little higher, watching the reflection of the corridor. Then he moved his hand to the ground, searching for the smallest piece of rubble. His fingers closed around a stone fragment. With slow precision, he tossed it into the hallway. For one heartbeat, there was silence. Then the walls came alive. From every hole, thin steel darts shot out with deadly speed, stabbing into the opposite wall. The clanging noise echoed like 1,000 blades colliding. Sparks lit the dark for a moment before silence returned. The stone he had thrown clattered to the floor, pierced through twice before it stopped moving. Gasps rose outside. Many aliens had seen prisoners hesitate before, but none had survived this far. The darts always came before anyone could react. But this human had not just survived, he had made the labyrinth reveal its secret first. The nobles narrowed their eyes. Some muttered about luck, others felt a sting of unease. The human pressed his back flat against the wall, breathing slow. He counted in his head, replaying the sound of the darts firing. The timing mattered. He had learned during Earth training that machines always needed rhythm. Reload, fire, reload. His lips moved silently as he counted the seconds. He waited for the next round. His patience was the opposite of every alien who had run blindly forward. Another click. The walls hissed. Darts fired again, exactly on the beat he had guessed. He moved fast now, slipping into the narrowest space between the cracks in the stone. The darts flew past his head, missing by less than an inch. One sliced a line across his sleeve, leaving fabric torn but skin untouched. He didn't flinch. He didn't panic. His eyes stayed cold. The crowd outside erupted in disbelief. Nobles leaned forward, claws tapping their armrests. Impossible. No creature has passed this stage. Some soldiers whispered among themselves, wondering if the human had some hidden device, some alien technology. But the truth was simple. He was surviving with nothing more than a shard of glass, a rock, and his own patience. He continued forward, pressing his shoulder against the wall as another wave of darts fired. The air filled with the sharp hiss of metal cutting through space. Each one missed him by the smallest margin. His movements were not fast but perfectly timed, each step calculated as if he had walked this path before. He used his reflection to see, his ears to count, and his instincts to move. The floor beneath him was slick with blood from those who had died earlier, but he placed his feet carefully, never slipping, never rushing. When he finally reached the end of the corridor, the walls gave a final click and fell silent. No more darts fired. He straightened slowly, tucking the mirror shard back into his boot. His breathing was steady, but sweat dripped down his forehead. He wiped it away with the back of his hand. For a moment, he glanced up at the ceiling, as if speaking to the labyrinth itself. "Not today," he whispered. On the outside, silence spread across the viewing stands. The crowd that had once laughed and jeered now sat still. The alien nobles exchanged nervous looks. They had seen warriors with blades, assassins with stealth, and beasts with claws. All of them failed before this trap. Yet one human, armed with nothing but small tricks and stubborn patience, had survived it. Some of the younger aliens leaned closer to the screens, wide-eyed. They had grown up hearing the legend that the labyrinth had no weakness. But now they had witnessed something no one could explain. Whispers spread like fire. Was it chance? Was it skill? Or was it something else? Something humans had that no one else in the galaxy understood? The human didn't care about the whispers. He only cared about the path ahead. He knew this was just the beginning. If the first trap had been this cruel, the ones deeper inside would be worse. His jaw tightened as he walked forward into the shifting shadows. His boots made no sound now, each step careful, precise. He moved like a predator, not prey. His eyes never left the darkness in front of him. The labyrinth had tested him once and failed. It would try again, and he would be ready. The walls around him groaned, shifting slightly as if the maze itself was angry. The air grew colder, heavy with the promise of more death ahead. He did not look back. He did not think of the crowd outside. His only focus was survival. With every breath, with every quiet step, he told himself the same thing over and over. There's always a way out. You just need to see it before anyone else does. Would you like me to expand Part 3, the shifting maze, into 900 words in the same style next? The corridor behind him closed with a deep grinding sound, sealing off the way back. Dust fell from the ceiling as the stones moved, heavy and merciless, like the whole maze was alive and angry that he had survived its first test. The human stopped, shoulders rising and falling slowly as he breathed. He did not panic. He had seen shifting traps before in old ruins on Earth. He knew this meant the labyrinth was never still. It would twist, break paths, and open new ones to confuse him. The floor beneath his boots trembled. Stones slid into place, cutting the hallway into pieces. Some passages crumbled and fell into bottomless pits. Others opened with a roar, releasing streams of boiling mist that rolled like living fog. The green moss lights flickered as if they were afraid too. The human stood still, eyes narrowed, listening carefully. Every grind, every shift, every rumble carried a pattern. He tilted his head, counting the rhythm like a drummer waiting for the next beat. Outside, the nobles leaned closer to the glowing screens. Some sneered, certain this would be the end. Others whispered with unease. The walls will crush him. The heat will cook his flesh. He cannot last long. They waited for screams. But instead of terror, they saw the human crouch low, one hand pressing against the ground. He tapped lightly with a small coin he had hidden, the sound echoing across the maze. The echoes told him where the floor was hollow, where danger waited. He moved with careful precision, stepping only where the sound returned strong and solid. Twice he stopped just in time as a tile ahead cracked and dropped into a void. The bones of other prisoners glittered far below, their deaths silent reminders of failure. The crowd hissed when they saw him turn away from obvious wide paths and choose narrow cracks between shifting walls. It looked insane, but each time he chose right. The boiling mist hissed close enough to singe his skin, but he ducked low and pressed himself against the cold wall, letting the deadly vapor rush past him. His movements were not fast but steady, like someone tracing an invisible map. The labyrinth groaned again, walls sliding with louder anger. A massive block moved across the passage, closing the way ahead. The human didn't run toward it like others before. Instead, he stood still and waited. His lips moved as he counted under his breath. He had learned in Earth survival that patience could be sharper than any blade. When the wall shifted again, opening a narrow gap, he slid through like water. The crowd outside gasped, some nobles gripping their chairs with claws. For the aliens, this was not possible. Their champions had charged boldly and died. Their assassins had tried to slip through quickly and been crushed. None had stopped to listen. None had counted. None had been patient. This human was breaking every rule of the labyrinth with tricks so simple that it shamed their warriors. A low murmur spread across the stands. Some nobles spat, furious at the insult to their sacred trial. Others leaned forward with wide eyes, as if learning something new about the fragile race they had mocked. Inside, the human kept moving. Sweat ran down his temple, but his breathing stayed even. He pressed his ear to the wall, closing his eyes, hearing the vibrations inside the stone. He traced with his fingers, feeling which sections were hollow, which were solid. His mind built a picture of the maze in ways no alien could imagine. To him, the shifting walls were not chaos. They were a giant machine with rules. And all machines could be read if you listened long enough. The floor ahead cracked loudly. A section began to tilt, sliding toward a pit. He ran forward for the first time, not blindly, but because he had already timed it. At the last second, he leapt, landing on a safe stone slab just before the collapsing floor fell into darkness. The crowd outside shouted, some in awe, others in rage. One noble slammed his fist and growled, "He should not still be alive." Another whispered, "He is not fighting the labyrinth, he is learning it." The human crouched again, pulling another stone from the ground. He tossed it down one of the new passages that had opened. A moment later, the floor there shattered, the stone disappearing into the void. He smirked softly and turned toward the opposite tunnel. His calm unsettled even the viewers. They wanted fear, screams, blood. But what they saw was quiet confidence, a creature who treated death like a puzzle to be solved. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The labyrinth twisted and rumbled, but he never lost his rhythm. He paused at every turn, listening, testing, counting, and moving only when the timing was right. He slid through gaps just before walls slammed shut, crossed stones just before they dropped, and avoided mist by seconds. It was like watching a dance with death. The nobles could not look away. Finally, he stepped into a wider chamber. The walls there glistened with moisture, steam hissing from cracks. The air burned his lungs, but he did not falter. He had survived the shifting maze out, and his eyes told the watchers outside one simple truth. He was not done. He would keep going, no matter how angry the labyrinth became. The crowd was no longer laughing. They were silent now, staring at the one being who had lasted where thousands had failed. The labyrinth had shifted, twisted, crushed, boiled, and broken countless victims, but this human had passed its second great trial. And as he walked deeper into the darkness, the aliens realized something they had never imagined before. This fragile creature from a distant world was not prey. He was teaching the galaxy's deadliest maze how to fear. Would you like me to continue and expand Part 4, The Beast's Den, into 900 words in the same style? The tunnel grew darker, the moss light fading until only a faint glow touched the walls. The human steps slowed. The silence was too heavy now. It was the kind of silence that pressed against the skin, warning of something alive nearby. He placed one hand against the wall, steadying his breathing, his senses sharp. Then it came, a low growl that vibrated through the stones, followed by the sound of claws scraping across the floor. The human froze, eyes narrowing, body leaning low like a hunter preparing for a strike. From the shadows ahead, two green orbs flickered. They were not lights. They were eyes, glowing faintly, fixed directly on him. A shape crawled forward, huge and armored, its 6 legs scraping against the stone. Plates of black chitin covered its body like natural armor, and its mouth dripped thick venom that sizzled when it hit the ground. The beast's roar shook dust from the ceiling, a sound that made weaker creatures collapse in terror. Outside, the crowd erupted in cheers. They knew this monster. It had killed dozens before. Even trained alien warriors had been torn apart within seconds. The nobles leaned forward eagerly. "Now it ends," one hissed. The human did not move, except to tilt his head slightly, studying the creature. His eyes darted over its body, noting the thick armor, the glistening venom, the powerful claws. He whispered under his breath, fast, heavy, blinded by rage. He had seen beasts like this on Earth, though smaller, wild predators that relied on brute force instead of cunning. His lips curled into a small, dangerous smile. He remembered the jungle, the tricks taught by old soldiers. Animals, no matter how big, could always be fooled. The beast lunged forward, its claws slamming into the stone, sending cracks racing along the floor. The human rolled to the side, fast but not panicked, letting the monster smash into the wall instead. Stone shattered, pieces raining down. The creature roared again, furious. The crowd outside cheered louder, but their joy faltered when they saw the human was untouched. He had not run wildly. He had moved with control, using the beast's own strength against it. The human stripped off his jacket, his movements calm even as the creature turned toward him. He shook the cloth once, then threw it to the side. The fabric landed in a heap, still holding the heat of his body. The beast hissed and immediately pounced on the jacket, its instincts fooled by the false prey. Its claws ripped the cloth to pieces, venom burning holes through it. But the human was no longer there. He had slipped away, climbing onto a jagged ledge in the wall. From his perch, he looked down with sharp eyes, watching the monster rage at the empty cloth. The nobles stared in disbelief. "What trick is this?" one demanded. Another whispered, "He made it chase the cloth, like a decoy." They were unsettled. To them, survival meant fighting, claw against claw, blade against flesh. But this human had used nothing but a jacket and timing. The crowd that had once laughed now leaned forward, silent, as if learning something forbidden. The beast, confused, roared and swung its claws wildly, searching for the prey it thought it had killed. The human stayed perfectly still, pressed against the wall, breathing slowly. He knew from Earth training that predators lost focus when their senses lied to them. He waited, letting the beast's fury burn itself out. Every second he remained calm, the monster grew more desperate. It charged into walls, scraping its armored hide, snapping its jaws at shadows. Venom splattered across the stone, eating small holes into the floor. Finally, when the creature paused, panting, the human dropped lightly from his ledge. His boots hit the ground softly, his eyes locked on the beast. He picked up a broken shard of stone from the ground and hurled it hard against the far wall. The noise echoed like a body running. The beast instantly turned and lunged at the sound. The human moved the opposite way, slipping past the monster's claws with inches to spare. For the first time in the labyrinth's history, the beast had been outsmarted, not slain, but tricked into wasting its rage on shadows. The crowd outside erupted in shock. Some nobles shouted that it was cheating, that no one had ever faced the beast without fighting. Others fell silent, realizing the truth. They had sent warriors with weapons to die, and this human, with no weapon at all, was showing them what survival really meant. The human didn't taunt, didn't roar in triumph. He only moved with quiet steps, keeping his distance as the beast tore into empty stone. His calmness was more terrifying than any blade. When the creature lunged again, he rolled once more, slipping past with perfect timing, then pressed himself against another crack in the wall. The beast snapped at him, its jaws missing by a hair. Venom splashed past his shoulder, burning the stone where he had stood seconds before. But his eyes never lost focus. Minutes dragged on like hours. The crowd grew restless, their excitement changing to unease. The human had no weapon, yet he was controlling the battle. The beast, meant to be unstoppable, was being made into a fool, striking at air, wasting its venom, exhausting its strength. The nobles exchanged uneasy glances. This was not supposed to happen. The human crouched again, hand brushing the ground. He whispered, almost to himself, "All strength, no mind, easy." He moved carefully, sliding past the beast one final time, leaving it clawing the walls in confusion. The passage behind the monster opened with a grinding groan. Without looking back, the human slipped through the gap, leaving the creature roaring behind him. The gates of the chamber slammed shut, trapping the beast once again in its prison. The human stood in the new corridor, sweat dripping down his face, his chest rising and falling, but his eyes steady. He had survived another impossible trial. He had faced the labyrinth's deadliest predator without swinging a blade. And he had won. The silence outside was heavy now. No cheers, no laughter, only whispers. The nobles' voices shook as they admitted what none wanted to believe. The labyrinth had not failed. The labyrinth had been beaten by a fragile creature with nothing but Earth's old tricks. Would you like me to expand Part 5, The Pit of Illusions, into 900 words in the same suspenseful style? The air grew strange as he entered the next chamber. It was not cold like the tunnels before, nor hot like the mist halls. It was heavy, thick, and buzzing with something he could not explain. The walls shimmered faintly, as if made of water, bending light in strange ways. At first, he thought his eyes were tired, but then he realized it was deliberate. The labyrinth was not trying to crush him now. It was trying to break his mind. The chamber stretched wide, far larger than any passage he had crossed. The floor shone like polished glass, reflecting strange shapes that did not belong there. Dozens of doorways appeared in the walls, glowing faintly. Some stood open, showing sunlight and freedom beyond. Others flickered like fire. The human knew instantly they were lies. This was not stone and traps anymore. This was illusion, crafted to confuse and trap the weak. Outside, the aliens watching leaned forward eagerly. This was one of their favorite parts. Many strong warriors had made it this far, only to fall here. Some ran toward false exits, slamming into walls until their bones shattered. Others chased voices that whispered promises of freedom, wandering in circles until they collapsed. Some clawed their own faces, unable to tell what was real. The nobles whispered with pleasure, waiting for the human to lose his mind. The human stood at the threshold for a long moment. He did not rush toward any glowing door. He did not shout in confusion. He closed his eyes instead. He breathed slowly, counting, listening to the faint hum of the chamber. When he opened them again, his gaze was steady. Mirages, he whispered. He had seen tricks like this before, on Earth deserts where heat bent light, creating the illusion of water. Soldiers had nearly died chasing shadows in the sand, but old commanders taught them a trick. Narrow the vision. Force the eyes to stop seeing the whole picture. Look only at what cannot lie. He raised one hand and covered one eye completely. With the other, he squinted until the glowing doors blurred. Most flickered away instantly. The illusions could not hold when seen through a narrowed gaze. What remained was the true path. Dark, narrow, almost hidden between the light. He chuckled softly under his breath. Simple Earth trick. You'd never guess it would work here too. The crowd outside grew restless. They expected panic. They expected madness. But instead, they saw a human standing calm, one hand over his eye, walking slowly and directly toward a path no one else had ever chosen. Some aliens hissed in disbelief. Others whispered nervously. How does he know? The illusions shifted, desperate to pull him in. The glowing doors changed shape. Some now showed his home planet Earth, bright and green, calling to him. Others showed friends' voices, family faces, arms reaching out to him. The tricks tried to pull at his heart, not just his eyes. The voices whispered, "Come back, come home, escape this nightmare." For one moment, his steps slowed. The ache of memory pressed heavy on him. But then he clenched his jaw, muttering, "You are not real." He pressed his hand harder against his eye, refusing to look with both, refusing to let the full vision trick him. The illusion screamed, flickering violently, but he kept walking. Every step felt heavier, as if the floor itself wanted him to stop. His boots dragged, his heartbeat thundered in his chest. He forced himself to focus on the dark gap ahead, the one spot the illusions could not erase. He whispered his old training words, the ones soldiers used to survive desert mirages. One path is real. All else is death. He repeated it with each step, his voice steady even as shadows clawed at him from every side. The nobles watching began to shift uneasily. They had seen warriors lose themselves here in minutes, clawing at false walls until blood ran. They had seen proud generals break down, sobbing as they begged for doors that were not real. But this human walked steady, unbroken, eyes half closed, refusing to believe what the labyrinth showed him. The illusions failed one by one. The glowing doors flickered out. The voices turned to silence. The walls cracked as if angry, their lies were ignored. The human finally reached the end of the chamber. A single doorway waited there, plain and simple, without light or tricks. He lowered his hand, blinking both eyes open. Sweat poured down his face, his body trembling from the mental battle, but his gaze burned with triumph. He had not been broken. He had not been fooled. He had walked through the pit of illusions with nothing but an earth trick taught by men in deserts long ago. The crowd outside was silent. Their excitement had died. Whispers passed through them like cold wind. No one has ever passed this. The nobles stared at the screens with tight jaws and narrowed eyes. They had believed the labyrinth was perfect, unbeatable. Yet this fragile creature had broken its illusions with something as laughably simple as covering one eye. The truth cut deeper than any blade. Where their warriors trusted strength, the human trusted patience and cunning. The human leaned against the stone frame of the exit for a moment, catching his breath. His body was tired, but his spirit was iron. He looked back once into the chamber, now dark and empty, its false doors gone. For a brief second, he almost pitied those who had died here, lost to lies. But pity was dangerous. Pity made you slow. So he turned away, stepping into the next passage without hesitation. The walls closed behind him with a heavy groan, sealing the chamber once more. The pit of illusions had failed. The human was still alive. And the labyrinth, for the first time in its long, cruel history, had been humiliated. Would you like me to expand Part 6, the final trial, into 900 words next, with the same suspenseful style? The tunnel narrowed again, dragging him deeper into the heart of the labyrinth. The air smelled of oil, smoke, and something sharp like burned metal. His boots echoed softly against the stone until he reached a chamber so vast it felt like the inside of a giant machine. The ceiling was lost in shadows, but the glow of molten fire revealed enormous moving parts. Wheels of blades spun endlessly, gears ground together with teeth sharper than knives, and jets of flame burst from cracks in the floor in sudden waves. Whole sections of the ground collapsed and rose again like a giant's heartbeat. The human stopped at the threshold, his eyes moving slowly over every deadly detail. He had reached what the labyrinth's designers had meant as the final trial, the place where every warrior, every beast, every criminal had been torn apart. This was not a place for strength. It was a place for rhythm, for timing, for patience. The human knew it at once. He whispered under his breath, like a clock. Outside, the aliens roared with excitement. Their nobles leaned forward, eyes wide, finally certain this would be the end. The final chamber. Let's see your tricks now, human, some shouted. The crowd cheered like thunder, voices booming through the stands. No one had ever passed this. The machine spun without mercy, without pause. There was no path to survive. Yet the human stood calmly at the edge, watching, listening, learning. He crouched low, placing a hand on the trembling ground. Every vibration told him a story. The blades had rhythm. The gears had a cycle. The fire had a pause. It was not chaos. It only looked that way to the desperate. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing slow, counting. 1, 2, 3. The gears snapped shut like jaws. 4, 5, 6. The flame erupted, then died. 7, 8, 9. The collapsing floor rose again. His lips curved into a grim smile. The labyrinth thought it could overwhelm him with fear, but machines always betrayed themselves with patterns. He stepped forward. The first blades whirled in front of him, spinning so fast they blurred into circles. The crowd leaned forward, waiting for him to be sliced to pieces. Instead, he crouched low, eyes tracking the rhythm. He waited. Every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. When the blades shifted half an inch wider in their cycle, he rolled underneath them, sliding across the ground with barely a breath of space between his body and death. Sparks rained down as steel sliced the air above him, but when he stood on the other side, he was untouched. The crowd gasped. The gears came next, massive and grinding, their steel teeth closing with enough force to shatter stone. The sound alone was enough to crush courage. But the human did not panic. He crouched, eyes narrow, counting again. He waited, not for the opening he wanted, but for the one the machine allowed. The gears clashed once, twice, 3 times, and just as they began to pull apart, he darted through, his body twisting sideways to fit into the narrow space. For a second, his sleeve snagged against the metal tooth, tearing fabric, but he yanked free before the gears closed behind him. The sound was like thunder, the machine nearly swallowing him whole. The nobles gasped. The human kept moving. Flames burst from the floor next, roaring high like dragon's breath. The heat burned his face, his skin prickling with pain. Sweat poured from his forehead, but he did not rush blindly. He watched the cracks carefully, waiting for the tremor that came before each eruption. The moment he felt it, he leapt, rolling over the gap just as fire exploded behind him. For an instant, he vanished in the blaze, and the crowd outside screamed in triumph, thinking he had been burned alive. But then he rose from the smoke, coughing once, his clothes scorched, but his body still whole. The silence that followed was heavier than the flames themselves. The collapsing floor was next, whole slabs falling into darkness without warning. But the human had already felt their rhythm. He tossed a stone across one slab, watching it sink instantly. He turned to another, counted the seconds, and stepped onto it just as it began to rise again. His timing was perfect, his focus unbroken. Where others had stumbled, screaming as the ground betrayed them, he moved with precision, like a dancer stepping across drums. The nobles could not speak now. The crowd had forgotten to cheer. Each obstacle came faster, harder, deadlier, but his mind stayed locked on the patterns. His body ached, his lungs burned, his muscles screamed, yet he refused to break rhythm. He dodged blades, slipped between gears, leapt flames, and balanced on rising stones. Step after step, breath after breath, he pushed forward. Every move carried the weight of his survival. Every second demanded all his focus. Finally, he reached the last stretch. A line of spinning wheels waited, faster than anything before. Their teeth glowed red with heat, cutting the air with a sound like screams. He stood before them, sweat dripping, chest heaving, eyes locked. Behind him was death. Before him was death. Only through them was life. He crouched low once more, lips moving silently as he counted. 1, 2, 3. He drew a breath. 4, 5, 6. His muscles tensed. 7, 8, 9. He moved. He dove forward, twisting his body flat against the ground, rolling under the first wheel, springing up into a leap over the second, then ducking again under the third. Sparks showered around him, the heat blistering his skin. For a heartbeat, the entire labyrinth seemed to roar against him. Then, silence. He landed on the other side, knees bent, body trembling, alive. Behind him, the wheels spun on, frustrated at their missed prey. The chamber groaned in defeat. The machines clashed and hissed, but the human had passed. The gates at the far end opened with a deep rumble. Light spilled in, faint but real. The final trial had been beaten. The human stood slowly, his chest rising and falling, his face hard but his eyes burning with triumph. He walked toward the gate, leaving behind the machines that had killed thousands. Outside, the crowd was silent. The nobles stared, their faces pale with disbelief. For generations, they had believed the labyrinth was perfect, that no one could ever escape its final chamber. But now, before their eyes, one human had walked through it alive. And worse, he had done it with no weapon, no magic, no alien technology, only patience, timing, and the stubborn will of Earth. Would you like me to expand Part 7, The Exit and the Shock, into 900 words in the same style? The ground shook as the final gate rumbled open. Dust fell from the ceiling, and light spilled through the cracks like a promise. The human stood in the middle of the chamber, sweat dripping down his face, his body trembling from exhaustion. His clothes were torn, his arms burned with cuts, and his breathing was ragged. Yet his eyes were steady, locked on that opening ahead. For the first time since entering the labyrinth, he saw the end. He had survived where thousands had died. Outside, the crowd of aliens leaned forward, their voices hushed. No one had ever reached this point. They had watched countless victims scream, burn, and shatter. The labyrinth always won. But now, a fragile human stood at its exit. The nobles hissed and argued among themselves. Some demanded the gate close again, that this must be stopped. Others whispered that if he truly reached the end, it would change everything. The human took his first step toward the gate. The floor beneath him shook one last time, as if the labyrinth itself was not ready to release him. Stones cracked, gears moaned, and fire hissed faintly in the distance. It felt like the maze was alive, trying to pull him back. But he didn't stop. He walked forward, slow but unbroken, his shadow stretching behind him in the flickering light. Every step was heavy, yet it carried the weight of triumph. The gates groaned wider. A cold wind rushed in, carrying the scent of the outside world. He could almost taste freedom. Behind him, the machines clashed angrily, blades spinning, gears grinding, but they no longer mattered. He had passed them all. Now the labyrinth could only roar in defeat. The human crossed the final threshold. The moment his boots touched the ground outside, the entire structure shook violently, as though the maze itself cried out in rage. The crowd gasped, some falling silent, others shouting in disbelief. The nobles stood from their seats, their faces twisted with shock. They had never seen the labyrinth fail. Yet here he was, standing outside its gates, alive. He lifted his head slowly, meeting the eyes of the watching aliens. His body was broken, his clothes torn, but his stance was proud. He raised his voice, steady and clear, so the entire arena could hear. "It wasn't strength that beat your labyrinth," he said. "It was something simpler. An earth trick. Brains over brawn. Patience over panic." His words cut through the silence like blades, echoing against the black walls. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some shouted in fury, demanding his execution. Others screamed in awe, chanting that he had done the impossible. The younger ones stared at him with wide eyes, their beliefs shattered. If a human could defeat the Death Labyrinth, then everything they thought about humans was wrong. The nobles tried to restore order, their voices sharp and angry. "He cheated," one roared. "No creature can escape the labyrinth without magic or power." Another hissed, "Shut the gates! Kill him now!" But even as they spoke, fear crept into their voices. The truth was undeniable. The human had not broken the rules. He had played the labyrinth's game and won. The human stood tall despite his exhaustion. He scanned the faces of those who once mocked him. He saw their fear, their disbelief, their anger. And he smiled. Not wide, not mocking, but a thin, sharp smile that said everything without words. He had beaten their greatest weapon with nothing but stubborn will and simple earth wisdom. He had proved that humans were not weak prey. Outside the arena, whispers spread like wildfire. Messengers rushed to carry the news. Across the city, across the empire, the story would grow. A human had entered the Death Labyrinth and returned alive. The impossible had been broken, and nothing would ever be the same. The nobles tried to silence the crowd, but it was too late. The people had seen. The legend of the labyrinth had been shattered before their eyes. Some aliens trembled, realizing that if one human could outsmart the maze, perhaps humans were more dangerous than they had ever believed. Perhaps strength was not the only power in the galaxy. The human turned away from the gate, his body heavy, but his spirit fierce. He did not run. He did not collapse. He walked calmly down the steps, past the rows of guards who stared at him in stunned silence. None dared raise a weapon. None dared move. He had survived what no one else had. To strike him down now would not erase the truth. It would only make him a martyr. The air outside was fresh, cool against his skin. He breathed deeply, savoring it like a victory drink. The labyrinth roared one last time behind him, its walls trembling, its gates closing forever. But it was too late. Its perfect record was broken. Its legend was dead. The human kept walking, each step steady, as if he carried the weight of Earth itself with him. He had gone into the jaws of death and returned. The galaxy had called humans weak, fragile, unworthy. But now they would whisper a different word whenever they spoke of his kind: dangerous. The nobles watched in silence, their hearts burning with rage and fear. They had wanted to prove humanity's weakness. Instead, they had shown humanity's greatest weapon, the ability to think differently, to adapt, to survive where no one else could. And as the human disappeared into the distance, the crowd behind him chanted louder and louder, a sound that shook the very foundation of the city. The Death Labyrinth had never been beaten, until today. Would you like me to now take all 7 expanded parts and polish them together into one continuous 6,000 to 6,300 word story script for your YouTube channel, so it flows like a complete video?